So we talked about selectors and how we can have an H1 selector here and set some CSS rules here, change some of the properties. And then we'll see the changes affect every single H1 on the entire page. Now what happens if we wanted to affect one H1 tag and leave the other one, kind of to look a different way? We can do that using classes and IDs in CSS. And this is a very, very common way of using CSS. So you want to get comfortable with this. You want to get really familiar with this because this is going to be used quite a bit in web development. So first of all, just as a rule of thumb, you should only have one H1 tag per page, typically. So we'll get rid of one of those. Technically, you should just have one H1 element per page because, again, that's the main header. So we'll get rid of that one. We'll just add a few H2s here. So I'll save that, and then I'll refresh. And here we go. These two black statements here, these are H2 tags, right? So again, how do we select the first one as opposed to the second one? We learned that we could affect all of them simply by adding H2 and then saying, let's just change the color to red, right? So if I save that, and let's get rid of this margin and padding here. If I save that and refresh, you'll see both of these H2s turned red. But if I want to select one, take a look at what we can do. We can add what we call a class attribute. So let's say I want to affect the first one. I can do this. I can add an attribute here. It's called class and set it equal to just whatever name you want to give it. Usually you want to come up with a name that describes the content inside of the tag. So I'll just say second header. And you'll often see it with this kind of hyphen format if you need multiple words. But you don't want to have a space in there. You can have multiple classes if you want. We'll talk about that in a second. But let's just leave it like this. So second header. Now, instead of having an H2 rule there, I could just say dot second header. Look at this syntax. It's just dot and then second header. Then the same curly braces. We can say color red. So now when I refresh this, only that first H2 has a red color to it, right? So let's get rid of some of these other rules so we don't get confused here. So I'll save that and refresh. There you go. Only this H2 has the red. And the cool thing about using classes is that we can apply them to any other element if we want. So I could copy this attribute here and put it on this paragraph tag, right? So this paragraph is currently black if you look right here. But now that I've added this second header rule, which isn't the best class name if we're going to use it for both a paragraph as well as a header too, we may want to describe it like this and say red text. Let's do that. So change it to red text everywhere you're going to use that class. And we need to change it here. So now any element that has this class that says red-text is going to change and look like this because we set the color to be red. So that's really useful. We can use classes across the board. Now, you can have multiple classes per class attribute here. So we could have, 1, 2, 3, as many as we want, and all you have to do is space them out like this. As long as there's a space in between them, we can have another one. We can say, maybe let's have a class called underline. And what we'll do is we'll create a class here. Remember, you got to use this dot syntax, underline. And we'll say text decoration. This is just another CSS property. We'll say underline. So I'm going to save that and then refresh. Remember, if you need to pause the video to kind of follow along, but just make sure you're focusing on these explanations more than just copying the code and following along. So when I refresh, now we've got, this is underlined. This automatically gets underlined because it's a link. Let's go ahead and just get rid of that for now. So notice anything that has this class underline is going to show up as underline here. And in this case, it's just this one. Let's say we want the H1 to have the underline but not red. We could do that using this new class syntax we're learning here. So now if I say underline, because I have defined that here, right, this dot underline syntax, I can use that class in my markup here because we're linking this page in, right, this style sheet. So now when I refresh, you'll see this got the underline but no red color because we didn't add the other class that we called red text, which would just convert everything to red. So that's how you use classes, and you can have multiple classes. It's great for, you know, some kind of, if you really want some extra control over your styles and you want to make something look unique or stand out, and that's when you're going to really use that. And start to think about that a lot because you're going to use this quite a bit in your actual markup when you're building out web applications. That's kind of one of the most preferred ways to do it, is using classes. And I just want to point out in addition that you can also use this ID syntax. Okay, so you can say ID, and it's the same kind of concept here. Okay, so classes and IDs are very similar, and I'll tell you what the one difference is. So let's just come up with another one, and we'll call it blue text. Okay, so we have this ID. It's follow kind of the same guidelines here. We did the same thing with classes. We can do the same thing with IDs. So I could go in here. Now the difference is you don't do the dot syntax with ID. You do this pound sign or a hashtag. So we called it blue text, and we'll just say the color should be blue for anything that has this ID that's called blue text. Now if I refresh, you can see this is turned blue. Now, the one gotcha that you need to remember with IDs is that you should only have one ID of its kind. So technically, you don't want to do this. You don't want to say ID equals blue text here, and then let's try this and maybe add one here. That's not the way you want to use IDs. IDs are designed to only have one element on the page with that particular ID. So just remember that. We'll talk about why that's the case down the line, but for now, just know that you should only use one ID. So that's, if you want to single something out and say, okay, we know that this is going to be on its own. We don't need to make a class out of it and use it multiple times. We're just going to make this ID special. Sorry, this element here special. So then we'll set an ID, but you don't want to do this and have a second usage of that ID somewhere. So just remember that. I know that's kind of tricky, but you'll get used to that really quick. IDs are special in that you're only going to use them once on a page. So you can define the rule. You can make it as complex as you want. We could say text align and make it centered. So anything with that ID, we'll do that. But just remember, you can only have one thing that utilizes this ID. Classes, on the other hand, you can have as many as you want. And you can even put multiple classes on the same element, as we saw right here.